Hello everyone, welcome to another day of notes. It's Mr. Smith, your 8th grade U.S. history teacher here at Madonna Middle School, and today we're going to be covering Chapter 6, Section 2. Now your notes today are really going to cover what is the heart of the American Revolutionary War, what were major battles going on during the American Revolutionary War, and how did the colonists eventually get other European countries to side with the colonists and say, hey, these colonists may actually win this war, let's try to help them. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Let's find out. All right, so CNN Student News, like always, you're probably watching this video because you're either absent and or you're preparing for the Chapter 6 quiz or the upcoming Unit 2 test. So I'm not going to ask you to go out of your way and watch CNN 10 or CNN Student News. If you want to find it, just type in CNN Student News and it'll pull up the CNN 10 site or CNN 10. It'll pull it up and you can just watch it on your own. But again, not going to ask you to go out of your way to watch CNN 10 today. All right, so we've watched CNN Student News in class. We're going to do about 25 minutes of notes, and then you're going to read a couple different sources or perspectives about soldiers' accounts in and during the winter at Valley Forge. And then you're also going to write a raft response, which is essentially you pretending that you're a colonial soldier living in Valley Forge during that time, and then explaining to your family what was life like, what were the conditions like, and whether or not you would want to keep fighting in the war for independence. All right, so 3 key essential questions that we're trying to answer today. The first essential question is this: what major battle turned the tide of the war and made European countries think the United States could win the war? How did those European countries benefit or help the United States? And how were the conditions at Valley Forge for the soldiers? So by the end of class today, or by the end of this note session, you should be able to identify and explain major battles of the American Revolution, countries that aided the United States, and also problems that soldiers faced at Valley Forge. All right, so we talked about essentially what was going on outside of the fighting. We talked about Thomas Paine and how he wrote Common Sense. We talked about how the Declaration of Independence was signed was approved by Congress July 4th, 1776, signed August 2nd. Now we're really going to talk about battles and the fighting that was going on during this time where Common Sense is being written, the Declaration of Independence is also being written. And so the first battle that we're really going to be talking about is this fighting that's going on in New York. So in June of 1776, a month before Congress approves the Declaration of Independence, British fleets are going to arrive off the coast of New York. And so these British fleets are going to be controlled by William Howe, this British general, and he's going to have 34,000 soldiers and 10,000 sailors against Washington, who's literally this guy with less than 20,000 poorly trained soldiers and absolutely 0 Navy ships. So if you do the math, there's about 44,000 British soldiers and sailors combined going against 20,000 poorly trained colonial soldiers. So the odds are not in favor of the colonists. And in August of 1776, the colonists and the British are really going to be fighting, and the British are going to kick the colonist or the colonial army out of Brooklyn, and eventually by the end of that month or the end of the next month, they're going to be kicked all the way out of New York. And so Washington is no longer in New York. He's been kicked out by the British. Nathaniel Hale was a spy for Washington in New York. He is essentially going to get captured by the British government. And his story is crazy. So Nathaniel Hale, the spy for the colonial army, gets captured by the British during the battles going on in New York. And essentially what happens is he gets hung for treason against Britain. And as Nathaniel Hale is about to be hung, he literally gives out this declaration of he wish he could die more times for his country than just this once. And so he dies as an American hero, trying to collect all this different information about where the British are going, how the British are going to attack the colonists, and things like that. So one of the first war heroes during the American Revolution is Nathaniel Hale, this colonial spy trying to get secrets from the British. So in 1776, we talked about Thomas Paine and how he wrote Common Sense in January of 1776. Later on that year, he's also going to write something called The Crisis. Now, The Crisis is not like Common Sense. Well, it is and it isn't. Common sense was all about inspiring the colonists to try to fight for their own independence to gain their freedom. The crisis is all about trying to support the war effort and support the troops in their time of need. So Thomas Paine's The Crisis is really trying to encourage the American people to keep up their desire to fight for independence, but really just to support the troops any way that they can, to make sure that the troops don't get discouraged and that this war for independence doesn't just fizzle out, but they actually gain their independence like they wanted in the first place. December 25th, 1776, Washington and his men are going to make this crazy risky venture where they're going to cross the Delaware River and they're going to try to attack Fort Trenton from two different sides. And so this fort that Washington's crossing over the Delaware to get to is a surprise attack, and it really catches these individuals or these British troops and Hessian troops off guard because they're being attacked on land and also from the Delaware River by Washington and his men. So Washington's going to capture Fort Trenton and essentially capture the 1,000 Hessian mercenaries or paid fighters that were in this fort. The British find out that Washington and his men captured Fort Trenton, and so the British soldiers are going to try to surround Washington and capture the fort the next night. Washington knows and learns that the British are there and they're about to attack the next day, and so what Washington and his men do is they essentially clean out Fort Trenton for any weapons and armor that they could use, and in the dead of night, Washington and his men light all these different torches and these different fires inside Fort Trenton and then sneak out in the dead of night. So they leave Fort Trenton with all this ammunition and all these weapons, but they basically trick the British into thinking that they're still there until they disappear into the night. And then the next morning, the British realize, holy smokes, Washington and his colonial army is gone, and they're no longer at Fort Trenton. So that's the first time at Fort Trenton where the United States says, okay, we can maybe win this war. We've got things going. And then the second real turning point in the war is this battle at Saratoga. And so Saratoga really starts because the British decide that they want to cut off the New England colonies. And so the New England colonies that we've talked about before, like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, Britain's trying to cut off those colonies from being able to connect with the middle colonies and the southern colonies. So colonial forces try to outsmart or outdo the British Army, and the colonial forces are going to try to cut off the British Army. And so on October 17th of 1777, this battle at Saratoga, Washington and his men are going to cut off these supplies from the British forces that are going to be led by John Burgoyne outside of Saratoga. And the Americans are going to cut off these supplies from John Burgoyne, and they're going to win this battle at Saratoga. And so Americans think, we've beaten the British twice. We defeated them at Trenton, and we've also defeated them at Saratoga. We could actually win this war. And it's not just going to be the colonists saying this. It's eventually going to be European countries as well. And so after Saratoga and that victory by the colonists over the British at Saratoga, France is going to make an alliance or an agreement to work with the colonies. France had already been aiding money and also aiding weapons to the Americans under the table or to the colonists underneath the table. But now they're outright saying, hey, British government, we will support the colonists in this war against you. And so France is going to openly give weapons and money to the Americans and the colonists, and they're also going to fight the British in Europe. And so what France essentially does is they help the colonists with weapons and money, but they're also dividing the British Army into two different fronts or two different areas where the war is going to be taking place. So now Britain can't send all their troops to the colonies because now Spain is trying to attack the British as well. And so Britain has to pull some of their troops from the colonies and take them over to Europe. And so a two-front war, or Britain having to fight in Europe and the colonies, doesn't usually work out well because your forces are divided, and so you can't take all the individuals to that one area to try to defeat one group and then attack the other, because you have to divide and conquer and try to take over two different strong fighting forces at the same time. On top of France aiding by fighting over in Europe and also providing weapons and money to the colonial army, there's also going to be a German individual named Baron von Steuben, and he's going to try to help train the colonial army. So no longer are they going to be this ragtag group of just kind of farmers and merchants that kind of know how to shoot guns, but don't really know how to march in lines and don't really know how to fight in a war. Baron von Steuben is going to come from Germany and help train the colonial army. He is going to make the colonial army more effective when he arrives in, not Ion, 1778. And so Baron von Steuben is really going to help the colonists when they're at Valley Forge in this harsh winter, and he's going to train them into being these hardened, war-ready colonial fighters. Which leads us into Valley Forge. So before Baron von Steuben comes over in 1778, from 1777 to 1778, the colonial army is going to set up a winter camp in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Now, usually when armies used to fight, they would essentially take a break for the winter. This actually goes back to the ancients, where they would essentially stop fighting because they needed to harvest their crops, and they would stop their fighting just for the time so they could harvest their crops and kind of regroup, and then they would go back to fighting in the spring and summer months. So kind of the same thing. The colonial army is trying to regroup. They're trying to reset up themselves at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. And there's going to be way too many people in Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. There's going to be 11,000 soldiers literally that aren't going to be given enough food, clothing, shoes, and everything that they really need to make sure that they don't get sick, they don't get injured even more. And so life at Valley Forge was horrible. There's going to be a smallpox outbreak where essentially lots of people are going to get smallpox because there's not enough clean water, and they're not going to be having their restrooms in different areas away from their water source, so the water gets contaminated. And essentially what happens is, which is kind of crazy, the colonial army is going to learn how to inoculate, which is actually an African original medicinal way of basically treating people that have a disease. And so they take someone who has smallpox and basically they take their cut and they rub it into another person's cut. And so essentially they take that weakened smallpox, I don't know if it's a virus or that weakened bacteria, and it goes in the person's bloodstream. Your body, kind of like when you get a flu shot, is more apt to fight off a weakened version of that virus or bacteria. And so the colonists learn this inoculation of smallpox so they can treat their colonial troops without them getting sick and injured from this smallpox epidemic. And so that's kind of a good thing in this terrible, harsh living condition, is that they learn how to deal with the smallpox issue. Colonial women and women around Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, they're going to rally together. So it's not just a men's war or a colonial man war or anything like that. Women are also going to be involved in this war effort, and they're going to rally together and try to collect different food and clothing to help and aid these troops so they have enough food. And they're not just eating this mixture that you see right here, which is essentially just flour and water, but they're trying to give them something so that their troops are able to survive and they don't just desert and leave the army because of these terrible conditions. During this time, this is when Baron von Steuben is going to come in, and even though it's a harsh winter and these people are hungry and they're not having all the food and clothing that they need, Baron von Steuben is going to train these colonists to become these war-hardened, trained military people. And so in this harsh winter, it kind of is like this growing period for the colonists of, holy smokes, life is horrible right now, but it's not as bad as it was when we were living under British rule, and so we really need to bear down and fight for our own independence. And so this harsh winter essentially is almost like a phoenix time for the United States. They're saying we can do this, we can go through this harsh winter, we can defeat the British, and we can win our independence. All right, so as you can see, it's our last slide, the Valley Forge letters. Your task is you're going to read each question before you read the different source letters about individuals and their accounts from Valley Forge. Then you're going to read the source and answer the question using complete sentences. Then you're going to take your information from the notes and also from your source analysis, and you're going to pretend that you're a soldier writing a letter home describing what life was like for you as a soldier during the American Revolution at your stay at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. So that's your task. You have your source analysis and then your Valley Forge letter. Until next time, Mr. Smith, out.